Good morning, everybody. My name's Don, and I'm an alcoholic. And I'm really grateful to be here this morning and see faces of good old friends and new friends. Some of you I haven't met yet, but I'm really grateful to be here. My sobriety date's April the 9th of 1981. The center of my life is sponsoring people. I've been blessed over the years to do a lot of traveling and with AA and speaking, and that's great. But that's not what feeds me. What feeds me is working one-on-one with one alcoholic going through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a sponsor. My sponsor is Bob B. from St. Paul, Minnesota. I have a home group, which is the Calm Down Group, which I named 35 years ago when some of us started that group. It meets on Wednesday, and particularly back then, by Wednesday, I flat needed to calm down. That was how it got its name.
This guy. You're good. You're
Can everybody hear okay?
Yeah.
Anybody can't raise their hand.
More? Okay.
And I'm here today to talk about one of my very favorite parts of the 12 steps, and that's the maintenance steps. Steps 10, 11, and 12, designed for living. I'm not going to attempt to tell my story. Some of you heard me last night. Some of you may have heard me otherwise. But I will assure you that I did not come to Alcoholics Anonymous because it started to give me the hiccups. It destroyed everything in my life. Absolutely. I lost everything except my physical freedom and my life. I thought that I would die of alcoholism for years, and everybody that I've ever known who knew me during that period, including the people who tried to 12-step me, have agreed that the ego was just too wildly out of control and had too many outside issues, grave mental and emotional disorders. Had a laundry list of them. Amazing how they all cleared up when I did the 12 steps. But at any rate, I was taught that you do the first 9 steps in order, that they must be done in order. In fact, I was told that they weren't called the steps by accident, that they were called the steps because in a conventional staircase, step 2 actually rests on step 1. Step 1 is the base of step 2. And so those need to be done in order. However, 10, 11, and 12 are things that we can begin to use the very first day that we are sober. There's no order necessarily to them. The thing I know that I went on a 12-step call in the first week of my sobriety, and I had plenty of backup. I was just tagging along with a couple of guys with a lot of sobriety, but it was very helpful to me because I remember going in the old boy's trailer, and it looked like a tornado had hit it. It was awful, and he was in a terrible shape, and he was trying to smoke a cigarette, and he kept missing his mouth with it. Couldn't hit his mouth. But while he was doing that, he was telling us that his problem was he was too intelligent for AA to work for him. And that hit home with me, believe me.
Sorry, Don, I'm just going to bring this tiny little bit forward. You're good.
Okay. Is that better? Okay. In fact, just to digress a little bit, before I got sober, I mentioned this last night for those there. couple of months before I got sober, I was walking through a clubhouse in Nashville, Tennessee, where I got sober. And a big old tall boy, 6'5", Joe, walked up and looked down at me and said, "Don, I'm beginning to think you really are too intelligent for this program." And I thought he was giving me a compliment. My knee-jerk reaction was, well, thank goodness they finally figured out who they're dealing with here. But he went on, and I'm sure it saved my life. He said, and that's a shame, Don, because we've never really had anybody too dumb for this deal. And we bury you buttholes, except he didn't say buttholes, all the time. And that was like an icy hand closing over something inside me, and I thank God that that icy hand was still there. 2 months later, when I came in and did get sober, and it remains on duty today. You let me get a couple of steps or stitches away from the dead center of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is where I have to be. I cannot fit AA into my life. I have failed miserably at fitting AA into my life. And I don't see many people who do it successfully, or alcoholics of my time. I have to fit my life into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I feel the tips of those icy fingers, and I'm right back there. My original sponsor was a fellow by the name of Cherry Carpenter in Nashville, not Jerry, Cherry. In fact, he used to joke that his wife was the only woman in Nashville who had been married 40 years and still had her cherry. So he did have a little sense of humor to him. But he taught me a couple of things that I didn't understand until years after he had exposed me to them. One was when I referred to myself as a recovering alcoholic. He would gently intercede and say, "You call yourself a recovering alcoholic if you want to, but be aware that the book calls us recovered alcoholics." And I said, "All right, Cherry, where did they hide that in the big book?" Because when I got sober in 81, it was just the order of the day that you called yourself a recovering alcoholic. If you heard someone call themselves a recovered alcoholic, you wouldn't, "Oh, ego, he or she thinks they're sober, thinks they're cured, they're going to get drunk." He said, "Don, the first place they hid it was in the subtitle of the book." I didn't know the book had a subtitle, and I'd read it 3 or 4 times. But it was how 100 men and women have recovered. And he said, in case you missed it in the subtitle, we're called recovered alcoholics twice more in the first paragraph of the foreword to the first edition. He also told me that in his mind, and he wasn't on the soapbox about this, but he said in his mind that he only did steps 1, 2, 3 through 9 one time. And then everything else he did after that was steps 10, 11, and 12. In my case, when I had finished my amends, Jerry said, "The book says by this time your ego should be deflated and you should be in a state of recovery from alcoholism." And I'll never know why he picked 8 seconds, but he said, "In your case, I expect that to last about 8 seconds. And you will have to go to work on doing the work of 8, 9, and 10 a day at a time the rest of your life if you were to stay sober." And in the mornings when I read the 3rd step prayer and the 7th step prayer, in my mind, I'm not redoing the 3rd step and I'm not redoing the 7th step. I'm doing 11th step work. And when I write an inventory that is straight out of the big book, page 64 to 70 on the fourth steps, looks exactly like the fourth step. To me, it is not a new fourth step. It is continuing to take personal inventory under the 10th step. And finally, after a few years or so, I figured out why Cherry told me those things. He knew perfectly well that if I were allowed to grab hold of the idea that I was a poor little defective, sick alcoholic who would never be completely all right, that I was perfectly capable of being 30 or 40 years sober or dry and sitting around a clubhouse somewhere playing euchre, complaining about those earth people out there. That I can't go out there and work like that because those people get me drunk. He wanted me to understand that when I had done the first 9 steps the way the book says do them, and then was every day of my life doing the work that is steps 10, 11, and 12 to maintain my spiritual condition, that I ought to be at least as capable of dealing with this world on this world's terms as a person who never had alcoholism. And that's been quite a gift that Jerry gave me. Makes absolutely no difference in the physical way I do the program. It's just a matter of angle of approach. Also, I have trouble reading the big book. And the reason I have trouble reading the big book is I already know what it says. And 99 mornings out of 100, when I glance at the 3rd step prayer, the 7th step prayer, and pages 86, 87, and 88 on 11, my brain goes, I got that. And it's a good exercise. Don't get me wrong, it's got spiritual value. But I'm not going to learn anything here. But every once in a while, God will give me the grace of seeing what the ink on the paper says instead of what I thought it said. A good example of that is the first couple of years I was sober. You could put me on a lie detector box, and I would have told you that the big book said my daily reprieve was contingent on my spiritual condition. And that was scary. Because there were a lot of days then, and there's some days now, when I don't exactly wake up St. Francis. Wake up, feel cut off from everybody, don't want to get on my knees, feel cut off from God. Last thing I want to do is talk to the sponsor. He's going to want to talk about that girl again. I already told him when he asked me to sponsor him that it ought to be a felony for me to give advice on relationships. And, but he wants to talk to me about it anyway. And I can be way too busy to go to those meetings that day. And I thought for the first couple of years that on those days I was in mortal danger, that I was a sitting duck. And if things went wrong, I might just get struck drunk. And then one day I saw the ink on the paper, and it doesn't say anything about it being contingent on my spiritual condition. It's contingent on the maintenance of it. And that's the difference between daylight and dark. What it did, it instantly changed my reprieve from being based on how I am, over which I never have immediate control over how I am, to being based on what I do that day, over which God gave me one bit of power in this universe, and it's power enough. That's power over my own next action. So I learned that it didn't make any difference what was going on in the old crazy picture show in the back of my head. I could make myself get down on my knees and say those words. I could look at the books and try to read it, even if I couldn't remember the last word I just tried to read. And I could go through the day, and when the sponsee called about the girl, instead of telling the receptionist, I'll get with him later. I'm too busy. I could say, put him through and take a deep breath and say a little quiet prayer to seek to love, comfort, and understand him rather than to be loved, comforted, and understood by him. And let God change him from an unwanted interruption of my important business to a glorious opportunity to be of help to a fellow alcoholic. And I can say, good morning, buddy, how are you? What can I do for you? And when it comes time for the noon meeting, I can be way too busy to go. Can't hear thunder. Don't understand 1/5 of the words that are said in the meeting. Doesn't matter, because I know everybody that goes there and I know what they're going to say anyway. So it would just really be irresponsible to leave this important work and go over to that stupid meeting. And make myself get my butt out of that chair, get in that car, and go to that meeting. And while I'm on the way over there, I can pray to seek to love, comfort, and understand everyone there, and to lay aside whether I am going to get anything out of that meeting, and pray the proper prayer of what can I bring to that meeting. So that's kind of beginning to talk about the maintenance steps in general for me. In step 10, there's a whole lot of good stuff in step 10. It begins on page 84 where it says, this thought brings us to step 10. And in that same paragraph, it winds up giving us the AA code. I didn't know for a long time that there was a code of Alcoholics Anonymous. The AA code is love and tolerance of others. Love and tolerance of others is our code. So that's the code of AA. Some of my good friends out west who do a lot of speaking are much more structured in their sponsoring than I certainly would never, refer to Nazi AA or anything like that, but they certainly put a high value on accountability and that sort of thing, and so do I. There's a very important spiritual aspect to responsibility, to accountability, and that sort of thing. But responsibility and accountability are not our code. Our code is love and tolerance of others. And we've already been told, back early in the book on page 20, we've already been told that is our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon the constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. Now that's not mincing words. Very lives, constant. What that's telling me is that I have to persist in trying to effect a 180-degree change, because all my life, basically, I constantly was thinking of me and how to meet my needs and desires. I break step 10 down to step A and 10A and 10B. 10A is continue to take personal inventory, and that takes many forms. Even though it's actually in the 11th step, on page 86 there's a paragraph that talks about when we retire at night and the questions that we run through our head. And I use that as part of my 10th step of inventorying the day. I inventory it as I go through the day. And if necessary, I get out a pencil and paper and do a little writing. Cherry believed that a pen or pencil and paper were a recovered person's best friend to write about it. and periodically I do inventories that look just exactly like the fourth step, just exactly. But they're not in my mind. The 10-step works. And I don't have a set time period. Some people do. Some people do it annually and on different schedules. I do it when there's been a major change in my life. I feel like I need to 10-step that using the tools of the fourth step. And 10B, when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. I was told that the word promptly is only there for my comfort. If I want to eventually be comfortable, I can eventually admit I was wrong. But if I want to be comfortable promptly, I better promptly admit that I was wrong. And 10B has been one of the greatest molders of my behavior. It actually is molding my behavior in many ways, and I'll give you a good example. I would be sitting in my law office, somebody would come in with a little piece of legal question or work. Now, often it was somebody in AA, and often it was something outside my field of law that I wasn't even going to charge them for anyway. But I want to be a big guy, take care of things for everybody, so I tell them, I got you, I'll take care of it. And then I get busy and things get stacked on top of it, and 3 weeks later the phone rings and the receptionist says, Don, so-and-so's on the phone. It was almost automatic to pick up that phone and say, what? You mean my paralegal hadn't gotten to that yet? Let me check that out and I'll get back with you. I only had to call 2 people back within 5 minutes and say, I need to tell you, I just lied to you. That was not my paralegal. Didn't have an opportunity to do anything on that because it hadn't moved from where you laid it on the desk. But I will pick it up now and take care of it for you. And that molded my behavior because it is no longer automatic for me to tell that white lie. If you make yourself do it, just really seriously, we'll wind up not doing the stuff that causes us to do it so much. And step 10 tells us in the 10-step promises, which begin on the bottom of page 84, they are the promises that, to me, they clarify step 2. It talks about sanity will have returned, but then it tells us what sanity returning will mean. It says we will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we will recoil from it as if from a hot flame. We most surely, fellow wears glasses. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We see that our new attitude toward liquor has just been given to us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. This is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it. Neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality. What that does, I had hoped that the second step indication of the restoration to sanity was assuring me that I was going to be a paradigm of emotional stability. And it's not. It's telling me that if I thoroughly follow the path, I I will at least react to alcohol sanely. But it doesn't promise me the rose garden of total emotional stability. Although in using steps 10, 11, and 12 every day, I have found a great deal of what in me passes for emotional stability. I expect it looks as much like it, as so much like it that it might as well be emotional stability. Hope it does. I want to talk just another minute about it being based on the maintenance rather than on the spiritual condition, because that's so important to me. It was so important to me to know that I had the key to my reprieve in my pocket every day of my life, regardless of how I felt, regardless of what I thought, regardless of what I believed or did not believe. I had the key to a day of sobriety. You see, I get to stay sober today, not based on how I am. I get to stay sober today based on what I do today. I was told early on that I had enough information about AA for over 2 years to stay sober a day at a time the rest of my life, without learning one single new piece of information about AA 2 years before I got sober. They explained to me that what was killing me wasn't what I knew and didn't know, it was what I was doing and what I was not doing. And then we move on to what was my favorite step for the first 9 years I was sober and still is my second favorite step. The 11th step, and I love the 11th step. And I was a complete novice to prayer and medication, an absolute novice. I had never attempted to pray in my life. I had a lifelong history of being an evangelical agnostic. I just thought that belief and faith were the silliest thing I'd ever heard of. It was part of my mission to disabuse the superstitious from their superstitions. And turned out that it was action that let me come to believe. When I began acting better than the old crazy picture showing in my head, if I'd kept waiting for my mind to change before it took the action, I'd been dead over 40 years. What happened was I began to take the action before I believed. And the action, the behavior, led to the belief. And it's actually that way with everything in my life. I've never thought, felt, or believed my way into right action one time. I have to behave my way into right thinking, feeling, or believing. And I've learned that my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, aka the old crazy picture show in my head, have never left a footprint on reality in my life. They're just a will-o'-the-wisp between my ears. They shift and they change and they impact nothing or anybody. And unless I abdicate my behavior to them, then that behavior leaves a hideous footprint on reality. But the realization that I could strip my mind of its power, and the realization that I could not heal my mind with my mind, that if my mind were to be healed, it would be healed with my feet. And that great realization empowered me me so much, as they say today, because I was in charge of my growth then. You want to grow done, take the action. You don't take the action, you're not going to grow. All right, but so through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry it out. The simple thought of God. I can't have conscious contact with God unless I'm thinking about God. And if any of you are able to think about God 100% of the time, my hat is off to you. And you'll be the first I've ever met that told me that they could do that. So what I try to do is persist in thinking about God. I'll lose the thread 50, sometimes 100 times a day. And I'll be caught up in whatever it is I'm caught up in. But if I will remember to persist and go back and just simply think of God. You know, I've gotten in almost no trouble while I was thinking of God. And the silliest little things, or silliest sounding little things are so important to me. I've frequently done things like put a rubber band around my wrist to remind me to think of God. Wad up a piece of paper and put it in a little piece of paper and put it in a pocket that I reach into frequently to remind me of it. As I enter a car or a room, hold the door just a half a heartbeat. If you were standing right beside me, you wouldn't know anything had happened. But hold it just half a heartbeat for God to go into the room or car before me. And that can make a tremendous difference for me. The thinking about God is the first step of the conscious contact with God for me. I had to start praying long before I believed prayer would do any good. But I had to persist at getting on my knees every morning and every night. And I still persist in getting on my knees every day. And I don't know how to stay sober without doing that. I don't tell sponsees they have to do anything. But I do tell them to not ask me for any information or hints on how to stay sober without getting on your knees before your Creator every day. Because I have no experience in it. The only way I've been able to stay sober is to get on my knees. And I worried about the quality of my prayers. I began to come to believe, and be so scared or obsessed with something that I couldn't remember the last word. I just tried to pray. And I went to Cherry, my sponsor, with my problem on that. And he said, "Don, your ego's going to kill you yet." He said, "Let's examine that." He said, "Are you under the impression that God is unaware of your needs unless you clearly delineate them?" He said, "Or maybe you've got the idea that your higher power is so lacking in power that he or she is somewhere wringing their hands, saying, 'Oh, I hope Don says it right.' I so want to do it, but I can't do it if he doesn't get the magic words just exactly right." And he said, "Don, in your case, I really don't think it's conscious, but I think subconsciously it's more malignant than that." He said, "In your case, I think you subconsciously think you may sway God into doing something that God wouldn't, with your eloquence, that God would not do otherwise." He said, "Dummy, the important thing, the only important thing, is the willingness to humble yourself before your Creator and say please and thank you." And he underscored that there's absolutely nothing intellectual or psychological about prayer or the steps. It's all based on following directions, humility. So, as far as the meditation goes, and there are all sorts of different ways of meditating. I've got at least one sponsee that my friend Roy knows that God knows how many thousands of dollars he's got invested in his Buddhist garden, where he goes out and meditates in all sorts of formal ways. My sponsor Bob does a world of guided meditation, and all that is wonderful, and it works for them. For me, it's a much simpler proposition. Every morning after I've done my praying and reading, I make a gratitude list. And if I don't feel grateful for anything, I'll write down at least 10 things that I would be grateful for if I had any sanity that morning. And then after making a great gratitude list, I sit quietly for as long as necessary and make a list of things to do that day. And I have never, since I've been sober, I don't have a law life, an AA life, a family life. I just have a life. I've always been as every bit as likely to schedule you in my office to do a 5th step or a 3rd step as to bring me a retainer on a murder case. So it covers all areas of my life. And there are just 2 criteria for being on that list. Number 1 is something that has to be quite reasonably accomplishable within the day. I don't write down great generalities like fight fear. I write pick up clothes from laundry, get Sharon card, return Joe Jones call, file motion in Smith case, get the car washed. The second criterion is that there are things that if I do them, although it may be uncomfortable to me to do them, I will wind up more comfortable than if I don't do them. And it's amazing how that simplifies my life. And it kind of orders the day. Lets me not bite off more than I can chew. And it also molds my behavior, like 10B. About the second week that I've carried the same thing over to the next day, I get sick enough myself, I'll do it. But I don't, that meditation is simply my meditation, and I invite anybody to explore any of it's a plethora of paths of meditation out there, and many of them are wonderful. I want to close on the 11th step. We'll talk about the 12th step. I've been going about 40 minutes. I think I'll go ahead and take a break, and then we'll finish the 11th step after the break. How that thing?
All right.
I'm always honored and flattered when I'm asked to do something like this. But when people come back after the first break, I'm absolutely overthrown. My name's still Don, and still an alcoholic. And we're still talking about step 11. Something I didn't mention, after I had begun to come to believe, or at least trying to behave like I had become to believe, I went to Jerry and said, how do I begin to try to establish conscious contact with God in the mornings. And he referred me to page 86. He said, Don, it says in the book that on awakening, we think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking. Before we begin, first thing, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Cherry explained that to me very graphically, so you'll have to excuse the little bit of crudity to it.
Yes.
He said, Don, if that had meant after you went to the bathroom, you asked God to direct your thinking. It would have said there, after we peed, we asked God to direct our thinking. Instead it says, on awakening, which means that you had best try to condition yourself to, as soon as your eyes fly open and you become conscious, to run through your head, God, please direct my thinking before I start thinking about the 24 hours of the day. And then he said, I'll tell you, Don, there are two good reasons why you need to do it that way. He said the first one is that you desperately need to follow directions to the T, especially when you don't see any sense in it. And he said the second reason is you're perfectly capable of getting crazy enough between the bed and the bathroom to ruin the rest of your life. So that's the way Cherry laid that out for me, that on awakening. And over the years, I'd say 80% of the time, about the time my eyes fly open, it'll run through my head, God, please direct my thinking. The other thing about step 11 is really, really important to me. It's really simple, and it's so easy to overlook. For a long time, I would do my morning meditation, reading, and prayer. And I would do my little evening routine. And I would think that I had done the 11th step. Well, I had done less than 5% of the 11th step. The rest of it is the 95% or 98% of the day between the morning and the evening stuff. And that's where the rubber hits the road, is in the other 95% of the 11th step. And happily, we are given as simple an instructions on that as you could possibly be given. And it begins on the bottom of page 87. It tells us that every day, all day, we do 3 things. As we go through the day, we, number 1, pause when agitated or doubtful and ask for the right thought or action. Number 2, we constantly remind ourselves we are no longer running the show. Cherry explained that was worded that way because I was constantly trying to run the show. And number 3, humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, thy will be done. If you're looking at your big book, you'll notice that a paragraph does not end there. Going on in that same little paragraph, we have those simple instructions covering the other 95 or 98% of the 11th step, are the beautiful, practical 11th step promises, the most practical promises in the book. It says that when we do that, we become we are then in much less danger of excitement. At first, I didn't know why I ought to be afraid of excitement. I thought excitement was something to be sought, but I realized then it's talking about that jagged edge of excitement. It's not talking about joy or interest or anything like that. In much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. We become much more efficient. We do not tire so easily, for we are not burning up energy foolishly as we did when we were trying to arrange life to suit ourselves. And that's followed by what I believe to be the shortest paragraph in the big book. It works. It really does. And it really, really works. Just those three little simple things to carry through my entire day with me. Pause when agitated or doubtful and ask God for the right thought or action. And constantly reminding myself that I'm no longer running the show. There's a visual that I actually got from my sponsor, Bob. So I'm going to give him credits to claiming it. But it helps me an awful lot. When I'm trying to run the show, I am like an ant that is on a log which is floating down a river. And the stupid ant thinks he's steering the log. He's running back and forth, driving himself crazy, accomplishing absolutely nothing, and meantime ignoring the little ant crap that he could and should be doing. And when I'm running the show, I am that ant on that log down the river trying to steer the thing. Now, when I'm not, I am living in acceptance of the limitations of my knowledge and power. And while they are great, the knowledge and power that God gives me is plenty enough. But the limitations are great. The only real glimpse of God's will I ever get that I can rely on is in the absolute right now for my own next action. I believe there's a little piece of God in each one of us, and it's got many names. It's called conscience. It's called a moral compass. Conventional Christians call it Holy Spirit. I call it the divine spark, or the spark of the divine. And that thing lights my path. God lights my path through that divine spark. But God lights my path with a pen light for a single step. Not ever once does God light it with a floodlight so I can see 90 days down the road. I have always wanted God to come down and say something like, "Gee, Don, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, son. Let me lay out this next 90 days for you, how it's going to play out. And give me a call about day 85 and I'll give you another chunk." Well, ain't happening. I have wasted a world of time praying on Saturday for the strength to handle Sunday. And this is not happening. I'll get the strength to handle Sunday morning, but I'm not getting it on Saturday night. So the limitation, and also, we think we've got a handle on God's will. Well, we all are convinced that it'll be God's will 5 seconds from now. For us to be in this room with me droning on and you folks thinking, is this guy ever going to shut up? Or whatever you may be thinking. But the truth is, we could spend the rest of the day coming up with things that would absolutely and completely change what God's will for us would be 5 seconds from now. That would include things as simple as a fire alarm going off, maybe somebody's cell phone ringing, all the way through nuclear war. Could completely change what we believe God's will will be in 5 seconds. And yet I won't study about God's will for next Tuesday and 10 years from now. A chimpanzee has a far better chance of mastering quantum physics than I do understanding and predicting God's will beyond the right now. And God gave me one power in this universe, and that is over my own next action. And that's what that sparkle through fine lights for me, is that one step at a time. And where faith comes into it, to me faith is not so much a feeling. Faith is action. And I don't have to feel faith to act faithfully. Just like I don't have to feel love to act lovingly. And the only faith that ever goes in the record book or leaves a footprint on reality is the faith that I do. And the only love that ever leaves a footprint on reality is the love I do. So when I approach it that way, life becomes pretty doggone simple. And my ego and brain scream, nah, it can't be that simple. No way in the world is that simple. We've got to be more involved than this crap is complex, man. Takes an extraordinary man like man to even figure it out, you know. It's that simple. Taking that next stitch where God wants me to take it and behaving like a person would behave. If they believe that God will take care of them, if they will take care of God's other kids, if they will, as my hero Chuck Chamberlain says, help God's kids do what they need to have done for fun and for free because I want to. You know, another thing Chuck says that's been really important to me, and you talk about freeing. Chuck says that whatever it is, anything, if it's hard, I'm doing it wrong. And I've come over the years to believe that if it's hard, I'm doing it wrong. And the wrongness is usually that I'm coming from a self-centered place on it. But things are not complicated, and they're not hard for me when I do it in that simple way. So those are the practical promises that we get when we use that 11th step. I'll start talking about 12 because 12 is what we could talk about all day. Of course, we talk about any of it all day, but particularly 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry the message to alcoholics. Watch me get the 12th step wrong. We tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Well, first place, I've heard much made about apparently the only thing that the steps themselves are promising us is that we will have a spiritual awakening. And what is a spiritual awakening? It's been, the appendix on spiritual experience and that sort of thing. And I suspect whatever it is to the individual is probably sufficient. But I have no confusion about it whatsoever. It's simply an awakening. I have been comatose to the fact that I am a spiritual creature in God's spiritual world. I'm a magical creature. Do you ever think how magical a human being is? A living, sober human being is absolutely beyond magic. And the gift of a day of being part of God's magical world is the greatest gift on earth. If I contemplate all the times that sun set and rose before I got here, and all the times it will rise and set after I'm gone, and I do the math on it, the odds of me being part of the magic on this particular September day are greater than the odds against me winning Powerball. So every day of human life being a magical creature in God's magic world is a greater victory than winning Powerball. And when I can keep that focused, I'm not as apt to throw the gift of a day of human life back in God's face because I don't like the way it is wrapped. And I'm guilty of having squandered and thrown away many, many days in my lifetime. Most terrible waste in the world.
I'm just going to tilt this a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good.
Most terrible waste in the world is forfeiting a day of human life by throwing it back into God's face because I don't like the trappings of it. The days that I'm conscious, the days that I've got these eyes to see all this beauty and I've got the ability to love you folks and I've got the ability to communicate and the human hand, Lord, it's just miraculous, the things that can be done just with human hands, the things that we take for granted every day. It's such a huge gift. And that helps me to understand just what a gift a day of life is. There are some Tibetan monks, I understand, who begin their day by contemplating their own corpse. At first, that doesn't sound very pleasant, but I understand it. I don't do that, but I understand it because that heightens their awareness and their appreciation for the gift of being part of the magic today. And if I keep that in mind, I'm going to behave a whole lot better, and I'm going to enjoy myself a whole lot more. But all right, and I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but did. But